get started. Today, we're going to talk about DMAAIs and JD Edwards. First, just to go over some of the topics I'll cover, we're going to talk briefly about how they work, what they are. We're going to look a little bit about how to set them up. So I'll give you a view of what the setup screen looks like. We're going to talk about the use of these wildcard entries, the companies 00000 and the 4 asterisks for the GL class. So we'll talk about the impact of those. I'm also going to provide some information about what tables are used, the DMAAI tables, what they are and what programs use them. So that will be some good information where if you take a copy of the slide deck, which you will be getting in an email, this will be good reference material for you. What the impact of line types are on the purchase order and sales order and how they impact DMAAIs. And then finally, we'll go over some tips and tricks that I've discovered over the years and we'll share with you this afternoon. Okay, first, how DMAAIs work. Well, what are they? So we have our physical inventory out on the production floor, in a warehouse, wherever it may be, and we start doing transactions in JD Edwards. Now, the idea here is for every time we ship something out, we complete a work order, we receive something in, we need to record the fact that that inventory has arrived or has left on our general ledger. So what we do is we use DMAAIs, for the distribution, manufacturing, automatic accounting instructions, as the roadmap to determine how to distribute the GL entries for these inventory transactions. So to get from the actual screen that the end user is keying on into the general ledger, there's a map, and that map is the DMAAIs. Okay, an example of how they work. Let's say we're adjusting in some inventory. So you go to your inventory adjustment program on the main menu. The program behind the scenes that option will call is P4114. So that's the program for inventory adjustments. Now this program is hard-coded and it knows that, well, I'm doing an inventory adjustment. Now I need to use DMAAI tables 4122 and 4124 to go get my account numbers in order to make the journal entries. So once I've fetched those account numbers, now I can go ahead and I can apply the debits and credits to the general ledger. Okay, so every program is like this. They are mapped, they are hard-coded to use specific DMAAI tables. And once they find those and things are validated, the GL entries are made. So that's how the DMAAIs actually work. Now, as far as the setup goes, you can get to the DMAAI setup screen if you have FastPath just by typing DMAAI. If you have access to report writing tools and you want to export the data from JD Edwards, that data is stored in table F4095. Okay, so that's the data table. The DMAAI tables, you can see a piece of them listed here for inventory, but there are dozens and dozens of DMAAI tables. Okay. Now, when you go ahead and make the entry, you can see here as an example, you can put in the company 00000, or that wildcard I was talking about. The same with the GL class code. However, the document type that you enter must be a valid document type. Okay. There's no wildcard for the document type, and there also is no wildcard to use for the object account. Okay. These account numbers that you key in here are the ones that get looked up, right? Every item has a GL class. I'm doing an inventory adjustment. If the item's GL class code is IN99, it's going to want to do the debit to 1.1411. Okay, it's important to know that the account numbers that you key in here are not validated at the time you put them in here. And that's because of things like flex accounting, where you might want to leave these blank, whether you want the business unit of part of the account number to default to the branch plant. So the account numbers themselves are not validated at that time. Okay. Now, the key to entering this is company doc type geo class. So I cannot have repeat entries for the same company doc type and geo category code. So those three fields are the key, are the unique key to this information. Okay. So that will prevent you from entering duplicates. Now, I just briefly mentioned the use of the wildcards, the company zero and the asterisk. So what we're going to do is go through the process of how the system goes and looks up an account number using the DMAAIs, because these are valid entries, the company zero and the asterisk. So if we're going to do an adjustment for an item in company 100, and let's say it has a geo class code of IN20, for our example, the first thing that the adjustment program is going to do is to try to match on exact company number and exact geo class. It's looking for that specific entry. If it finds that, the account number that's associated with that entry, that's the one it will use. If it can't find that explicit entry, then what it does, it says, well, company takes priority. Is there an entry for an IA for company 100, but where the geo class code is the asterisk? So what the asterisk means is, I don't really care what the geo class. This applies to everything that doesn't have a specific entry. If it can't find that, what it does is now it goes for the company wildcard. It uses company zero. So do you have any company zero entries for geo class code IN20? And if it finds it, it will use the account associated with that. And finally, if it can't find that, it's going to use the wildcard for both. So we'll use company zero and the 4 asterisks. So you can have all 4 of these scenarios keyed into your system. This is the order in which it will actually use the DMAAI and use the account number. So that is the hierarchy. So let's say I didn't have a DMAAI entered in the system for any combination here. So then what would happen is you would get an error message. If you're using an interactive program, such as an inventory adjustment where you're doing it right on the screen right then, you will see an error message right then and there. If you're doing transactions such as work order issues or completions or sales ordership confirms, those error messages, those aren't online transactions as far as I'm trying to create the GL entry right then and there. So that happens later, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. Okay, so first I would like to ask a poll question. So let me get this question up there. So let's say we're doing an inventory adjustment in company 1 for an item with an IN20 geo class code. So of my choices here, which GL class would be used? And let me launch this. And you guys will have a chance to vote on this. Okay, so if you would just choose the one you think is correct, and we'll wait about a minute or so, and then we'll see where we stand. Okay, results are coming in. Okay, I will give it another few seconds here. Okay, it looks like everything's slowing down. So let's take a look at this. And what is the correct answer? The correct answer now is going to be number 3, where we have a specific company number and we are using the asterisk. And we have a 65% return rate on the correct answer. So the vast majority of you got this correct. So let's think about this in regards to the last slide that I just showed. So remember, I came in and it said, well, the first thing it's going to look for is a perfect match on both the company number and geo class code. So do we have an entry for company 1 and IN20 specifically? And the answer is no, we don't. Right, so there is no IN20 for the company ones. So the second thing it will do is it will look for an exact match on the company number and the asterisk. So that's the one that was picked up. So since we had a match for the exact company, that would take precedent over number 1 and 2 here. So very good. Most of you got this one pretty easily. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go through, and the idea here is not to study this. I'm not going to ask you a quiz question on any of these dirty details here, but these are going to be provided as reference material for you. So notice that we have groups here. So the groups here mean that all of these transactions use all these different, or can use all of these different DMAAI tables within the group. So the ones that we're looking at here are the quote unquote inventory transactions, meaning that I'm doing an issue, an adjustment, a transfer, a reclass, a lot release, right? A cycle count, those types of things that just affect the item. So I'm not doing PO receipts, I'm not doing anything against a work order, I'm not doing anything against a sales order. Okay, so these are just the inventory transactions. Now notice in the header up here, there is a numeric code 41 next to inventory. Now what the 41 means is that that's a system code that has been assigned by JD Edwards. And one of the great things that they did way back in the beginning is every module has a code associated with it. And when you start looking, all the program numbers, or the vast majority of them, will start with that 2-letter code. So if you didn't know what this program was and you were in a conversation and somebody says, well, I use P4114, you may not know what it is, but you know by the 41 that it's an inventory program. So all the inventory reports will start with R41. All the inventory files in the database start with F41. The DMAAI tables all start with a 41. So you see where I'm going with this. Now, this isn't 100% all the time, but it is pretty consistent. It really works out great when you need to start understanding what's going on behind the scenes, that these codes are there. So we have one, the ones we use most often when we're talking about inventories, inventory sales, purchasing, and manufacturing. So those are the tables that we'll talk about here. So here we go, issue, transfer, adjustment can all have these doc types entered in 4122, right? For the balance sheet side, 4124 is the expense, okay? Zero balance adjustment, 4126, okay? That is the balance sheet side, that's the expense side. And the 4141, that comes into play if you're doing a transfer from A to B, and those locations have different costs. So that's where the standard, any cost variance would go. The account pointed by 4141, and that's the one that only the IT uses. So these will be any of these documents, the IT here. So we can go through the other groups, you know, the cost change here, the DMAAIs for that, the cycle count for that. So it's typically a balance sheet expense, balance sheet expense, balance sheet expense. Okay. So that's the inventory. Inventory is system 41. Now we'll talk about purchasing, right? So we have our purchase receipts, which are standard document type OV. We have our vouchers that come into play. So we have our PV. So that's pretty much it in the purchasing realm. The purchasing code is 43. So you'll notice a lot of the 43s here. And you see they snuck in a 44. They must have run out of 43s at some point. But for the most part, everything starts at 43. Okay, so 4310 is, here's my inventory valuation on a stock receipt. This would be the balance sheet side. The 4320 is received not vouchered. We have some variance accounts here for standard cost variance, so on and so forth, so you can see the descriptions. So another thing you can tell by looking at this is DMAAIs can get complicated, and this would be a very true statement. Sales of system 42. This is invoicing. Here we go with 4220 cost of goods, 4230 revenue, 4240 is the inventory, so on and so forth. And then finally, we'll talk about manufacturing. Manufacturing accounting runs, and we have variance accounting that are part of the process. And these are the DMAAIs that get invoked during those processes. Okay, now this list that I gave you is not all DMAAIs. J.D. Edwards continually refines their processes. They can add more, but this is the vast majority, especially concerning the ones that revolve around inventory system. Okay, so now it's time for our second poll question. So which system code is represented by the number 42? So let me put up the second poll question here. Which, oh, well, it looks like our poll question has the answer right in it. That's kind of crazy. So let's see if anybody gets it wrong. How about if we do that? So we all know from the poll question that the answer is sales. It's number 42. We can see purchasing is 43. Inventory is 41, manufacturing 31, 32. There is a document that J.D. Edwards does put out that lists all the systems and all of the system codes. It is quite handy to have. So and there's also a UDC table in the system where if you can access that, it will list the codes as well. Okay, so these are just four of several dozen modules. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about line types. Now, where do line types come into play? Well, line types come into play when we are talking about doing receipts against purchase orders and shipments off of a sales order. Okay, so one of the major components of looking up a DMAAI is the GL class code. So remember, we need a GL class code to go do the lookup in the DMAAI tables. Okay, so line type and line type setup can override item level GL class codes depending on how they're configured. So as an example of that, this screenshot here is of the order line type setup. And one of the fields that needs to be set is this one here. It's called the inventory interface. So now I can have, let's say, a non-stock line item on a sales order. So let's say I'm shipping out, I don't know, some literature or some kind of things that you don't track in inventory. So you don't want any Cardex records, you don't want any hits on your inventory accounts. So what you might do is put that on the sales order with a line type of N. Okay, if I have a line type of yes, what that means is this is a stock item. When I do the transaction, my quantity on hand for that item is going to change. It needs to be a real item. It's going to be validated. It needs to have quantity on hand. If I'm shipping it, it needs to have a location set up in order to receive it. Okay, and then you'll see a third one here, and there's a couple more different interface types. You'll see the B, that's account purchasing, and there's a D for direct ship type transactions. So when we look at this, here's what the Y and D means, and here's where the GL class is going to come from, right? So I do a receipt on a purchase order. In the inventory interface is a D. I'm going to validate the item location file, right? Because I'm going to receive to a location. That GL class determines the account number that the journal entries are written with, okay? If it's an N, like say this first one, sales or use tax, okay, the GL class code is going to come from the fold of the line type. So this is old terminology. What that really means is it's going to come from this GL offset column. And the same with A, right? So if the inventory interface on the line type is an A, it's going to use the GL class that's specified in the line type setup, not the GL class code from the location or from the order itself, right? This is where it will get it from, okay? Okay, so now poll question number 3. If I have a purchase order and it's received and the inventory interface is set to N, which geo class code is used? So let me put that question up and let's see what we get for responses. Okay, so will the geo class come from that item location file? Will it get pulled from the item master? Will it go to the purchase order line, the line type setup, or none of the above? Okay, so we'll give that a minute or so. Let the results come in. Oh, this one's spread out a little more than the other ones. Okay, just a few more seconds here. All right, it looks like we're pretty stable now. Okay, so let me close this and let you guys see the results. Okay, so as soon as we define the inventory interface is set to N, that means it's a non-stock. So the inventory is not going to be looked at all. So I don't need an item location and I don't need an item master. So those two are ruled out right away. Now, the purchase order line and the line type setup, if you answered either one of these, 3 or 4, I'll give you credit for that, because when I enter the purchase order and I key in the line and I put the line type on there with this inventory interface, what's going to default on the purchase order is coming from the line type setup. Okay, even if it's an item number, if it's a valid item number, if you set that line type to N, the geo class code is going to come from the line type setup. So on here, I have the line type setup circled. That's really truly where it comes from, but it is going to default on the PO line. So either one of those would have been a correct answer. So very good, guys, very good. Okay, some helpful tips. Let's talk about the model DMAAI table. Now, I know this chart looks a little busy, okay, but I'll try to boil it down for you and make it simple. So basically what we have here are the 4 modules that impact inventory quantities. So here's our manufacturing with system codes, our inventory, sales order, and purchasing. These are the DMAAI tables that are invoked most frequently. These documents here are the standard document types that most people use and set up in their system. Okay, there can be others. Now, so what this is saying is, if I am going to do a material issue, I want to see that set up in 3110. Okay, the inventory completion, that would go in 3130. So if I see a document type IC in 3110, that's a mistake. That will never be used. Okay, so if we're going by these standard doc types and the standard use of the tables, that's what that tells me. So I would expect to see things set up here for IVs, but I would not expect IMs in these 32 series. Okay, so that's kind of how you read this. So there are a lot of DMAAI tables. So you can see, just count the X's. Okay, there's plenty of them. Here's a listing of all the tables and what they're used for. Now, the concept of a model is, it can be very complex to enter the balance sheet side, right? Expenses are even more complex because there can be different accounts for every geo class code. The balance sheet side is a little bit easier. So what I like to do is to take one table, and the one I like to use as quote unquote a model is DMAAI 4152 with document type PI, where we do our cycle counts. Okay, so cycle counting is typically set up for every item that needs to be stocked, right? So eventually you're going to do some kind of count on it. So what we have inside this table, and if we remember DMAAIs are a combination of company, document type, geo class code, and the account number. So document is PI, your company number, your geo class code goes to this particular account. So if I had a raw material geo class code, I would expect the debit and credit for the balance sheet to go to the raw material account. If I had a finished goods geo class code, it would go to the finished goods account, and so on, right? Once I have one that I am absolutely sure is correct, now what I can do is I can take this one and I can compare it to all these other tables that are marked in green here. And they should look very similar, if not exactly the same, okay? Now, the theory behind this is, let's say, for example, I have a purchased part. And it's purchased raw materials. So I purchase it, I receive it in, I debit the raw material account, okay? So that would be purchasing, which is 43. So 4310 kicks in for inventory. So let's say there was $100 there. That $100 now goes into the raw material account, okay? Now, let's say the next thing that I did was something off the beaten path, right? And let's say I sold this raw material. So I did not issue it to a work order, I just sold it. Now I put it on a sales order. It still has the raw material geo class code, and I ship it. Well, now when I ship it, sales orders, the 4240 kicks in. Well, the 4240 for that raw material geo class code better point to the raw material account and not the finished goods account. Okay, so you wouldn't believe how many times that I've seen where somebody will use those wildcards and put in an entry and say, well, the only thing I actually ship is finished goods. So no matter what I do, right, company 0, 4 asterisks for the geo class, finished goods account. My credit's going to come from finished goods. That's a mistake, right? So I don't want to credit finished goods and then have a $100 credit in finished goods and a $100 debit in raw materials. That's not what we want, okay? So the lesson here is, if I'm a raw material, it doesn't matter what one of these transactions I do, debits and credits should go to the raw material account. So we need explicit entries to say raw materials equals raw materials, finished goods equals finished goods. So that's what I mean by a model table. Now it sounds easy, but there could be hundreds and hundreds of entries inside an individual table. And if you use those company 0 entries and the 4 asterisks, they tend to mask issues, right? So you won't get any screen errors, things will post to the GL, they just won't post the way you want them to, okay? So we need to take a model and then compare all of these other ones to our model to make sure that it aligns properly. So that's what a model table concept is, okay? Now, debugging errors, when you actually have an error, okay? So if I'm doing that inventory adjustment and it goes through that hierarchy, that 4-stage lookup, and it gets to the end and it can't find a DMAAI, well, what does that look like to the end user? Well, it looks like, and you'll get an error message just like this one here, right? So this was on an IA screen. We tried to do it. The item number had a geo class code of IN99. There was no DMAAI set up for that in table 4122. So we get this message saying that it is invalid. So how do we fix this? How do we get this transaction to work? We need to go configure that DMAAI. So the error message is pretty clear on what needs to be done to get it resolved on these interactive type transactions. So these would be issues, adjustments, PO receipts, those types of things would show an error right away. Conversely, when I have these 2 batch jobs creating journal entries, my manufacturing accounting or my sales update, it's a little bit different. I'm not going to get an online message because these are jobs that run at night in the background. Nobody's looking at a screen, okay? So what you're going to get is you'll get an exception report. And here's an example of one from manufacturing accounting. Okay, so now you'll see it'll have the AAI numbers, and it will refer you to the work center for the exact message as to what is wrong with these AAIs. Okay, so you'll get a very similar report for sales update. So these are batch, the interactive ones appear right in front of you on the screen while you're doing the transactions. These are kind of hidden. You have to go digging to find what the actual issue is. Okay, now what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is I want to introduce our RapidReconciler product to you. And the reason that I'm doing this is RapidReconciler has some things built into it that handle a lot of the issues with the DMAAIs that we talked about today. So briefly, just telling you what it is, it's an Oracle validated solution. It's a reconciliation tool for perpetual inventory, goods in transit, received not vouchered, subledgers to the general ledger. Okay, some of the benefits of using this right up front. We have a report that identifies mismatched DMAAIs in accordance with that model table tip that I told you about before. Okay, GL class code inconsistency is another good report to have. So certain programs get their GL class codes from different places. So if you have the same item whose GL class code, let's say on the location, is not the same as the branch, now you can create variances because your codes aren't consistent. Okay, we have some back-end process reporting on work order, sales orders, and your batches, as well as we do a transaction-based inventory, not a snapshot. Okay, snapshots are tough, especially when you're talking about manufacturing and sales, where the transactions don't get booked till later in the day, especially at period end. So if you're doing a snapshot, what can happen at period end is you take a snapshot where all your shipments have been removed, but nothing's been booked yet. So we don't have the inventory entries in the GL yet. So then you go and run your trial balance, you run your stock status, and of course you get a big variance. Okay, so we take care of all of that type of stuff. All right, so what I want to do is I just want to show it to you real briefly. This is what RapidReconciler looks like. Okay, here's the screen. It has all the account numbers that we're trying to reconcile, in this case in our inventory module. You can see we have in transit and PO receipts as well. Okay, we provide certain information like what your out of balance is by period. It is a database. But most importantly, what we do is we help you with any AAI issues. For example, if I go into these transactions, and these transactions here are all the ones that failed during the period that's been selected, and I look in one of the detail reports, it gives me all the details about the transaction. And if I scroll down, including the DMAAI setup. Okay, so it will tell you which DMAAIs get invoked and how they're set up. So if we have an accounting problem, we will be able to see it right in our detailed transaction report. So we're very keen on DMAAIs and how they can fail and how we can identify the failure and know what the right corrective action is. Okay, and on the surface, what we have is we have some built-in integrity reports that revolve around DMAAIs, amongst other things. Okay, here's how our DMAAIs have been entered in the system. We group them by those module codes, whether they're manufacturing, sales, purchasing, inventory, whether they're expense side or inventory side. Okay, so we actually teach you, what DMAAIs, how they're used. Okay, so we can do this, we can export all this data to Excel, and we can see that there's 5,200 rows in this DMAAI set. So it's not that big. I've certainly seen bigger ones than this. Okay, but more importantly, here's the model table. Here's the 4152, and in our case, we are not using the PI. We set up here a specific document type for 99, okay? And this tells us, oh, if my GO class is ASGB, here's the account number. Here's the business unit object subsidiary. Was it flexed or was it hard-coded? So flex, no, it's hard-coded. Sub, no, it's hard-coded. So we do support flex accounting as well. Okay, and we'll let you know where the stuff flexed from according to your setup. Then most importantly, here is our integrity report that says, let's take our model table and we'll compare all those other ones from those green boxes. And we're going to let you know, oh, the object account is mismatched. We have net zero conditions. So if I do an IA on an item with a GO class of PLAT, nothing's happening on the GL because the debits and credits are coming in and out of the same account. Okay, is that really what you want? Right? So we have this review process built into the product in order to find any discrepancies within your DMAAIs. Okay, and there are other reports here, but those are the three that are pertinent to our discussion today. Okay, we also have a complete as of. We do not use the as of in JD Edwards because we found that over time it becomes inaccurate. Okay, so we can select the period, any period we want to look at the inventory for, and within the period we can do an inventory by day. Okay, so we can actually select, this will list all of the days within that period ending date up here. So you can get a daily inventory just with a couple of clicks. Okay, so that's what RapidReconciler does. Okay, it reads your DMAAIs, it reads the model table so it knows what business units, object, and subsidiary accounts make up your perpetual inventory. We do evaluation and say, okay, right, if I go to one of these periods here, we can see our GL and perpetual line up exactly. Okay, here's our variant sources here, whether we have batches that need to be posted, whether we have orders that need to be processed, whether we have transaction failures, which we do, we journalize those, we go back to zero, we roll to the next period, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how that works. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Brooke and we'll do a wrap up and then have a Q&A.
Awesome, thank you so much, Ed. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see you.
Okay, perfect, thank you so much. All right, well, thank you so much, Ed, for your presentation and demo. That was great. I just want to cover a few follow-up items, and then we'll move into our question and answer section of our webcast. So our webcast today is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on JD Edwards. And we also provide extensive free educational resources for the JD Edwards community, including our educational webcast, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, and our online resource center where you can access on-demand webcasts, white papers, and more. And we also offer on-site and virtual workshops. And if you would like to sign up for any of our weekly email reminders or upcoming webcasts or our newsletter, you can create an account. Just go to getgsi.com, go to resources and events on the main page, and then you can select JD Edwards on the right-hand side. And while I see we have a few questions already submitted online, I just want to remind you that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so through the GoToWebinar console window located on the right side of your screen. And if you minimized it, you can just click the left arrow key to redisplay the panel. All right, Ed, our first question here is from Bill. And he said, what do you mean when you say the accounts aren't validated in the DMAAI setup?
Well, before I answer that, I just wanted to say one thing because I see there's a lot of comments here about the poll results blocking the slides. You will have access to those slides, and I do apologize for that. I did not realize that that was happening. So you will be able to get a copy of the slides, and I think, Brooke, you will be sending out a follow-up email that will have that attached.
You got it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So as far as what I mean by the accounts not being validated, so I key a business unit, object, and subsidiary into those fields, and it does not have to be a valid account number that's on the chart of accounts. I could just type in, anything, like, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say I type in the object. You don't have an object account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in your chart. Well, that screen will still accept that value. And when it goes to process the transaction, it will fail and say that that account does not exist. So it does not validate and make sure the account number is an actual account number until you try to do a transaction. Okay, so we need to be careful. So you can make typos and the screen will accept them. The reason that it does that is because there's a lot of flex accounting rules that are in place where you can leave fields blank. Okay, so, and that's valid. So it can't really validate the account number, and it doesn't. So you should just be aware of that.
Okay, great. And our next question is from Keith, and Keith says, trying to use the AAI tables for when we receive inventory. It seems like we have a doc type OV, which is not shown on the AAI graph, and the OV note says that it is hard coded.
Okay, OV is the default document type that JD Edwards does use for purchase order receipts. There are certainly DMAAIs for that we had on our purchasing page where it had the tables, the descriptions, and what DMAAIs were used. It was certainly in there. I'm not sure if there's an issue, Keith. If you want to reach out to me, we'll be publishing my email at the end of this. If you want to reach out to me directly, just write my email down and we can kind of talk offline on that. I'm not quite sure I understand where you're going.
Okay. All right, and let's see, our next question, let's see, it's from Melissa, and she said, do you recommend using company 0 and asterisks?
Do I recommend it? Absolutely not. I don't like them personally, but they do have a purpose. Their purpose is to save you from typing hundreds and maybe thousands of lines in the DMAAI table. A good place to use them is anytime you have a clearing account situation. So for example, if you're familiar with transfer orders and STOTs, okay, I can take an item and let's say I'm transferring it from branch A to branch B. Well, when I do the shipping part of that on the ST order, I am going to credit my inventory and debit my in-transit account. Now, does it matter what item I ship? In transit is typically just one account. So in that case, I could say, okay, let me use company 1, for example, and 4 asterisks to say anytime I ship something from A to B, my in-transit account, which is going to be cleared as soon as I do the receipt, right? That's going to be one account for every item. So no, I don't want to make 1,000 entries for every combination there. That's where the asterisk comes in. Okay, so clearing accounts such as goods in transit account, the work in process account, anything to do with direct ships, or anytime you have a clearing situation where it doesn't really matter what the item is, that's where you can use the wildcards. Other than that, what they tend to do is they will hide errors, right? So you won't get any error messages in the system or in the reports. You will just get journal entries that you don't expect. And then you'll end up chasing them down when you try to reconcile the accounts. So it's better, in my opinion, to make specific entries so you know. Another trick that I've learned is go ahead and put the 00 4 asterisks entry in there, but in the account number for the object, type ERROR, error. And that way, if that actually gets invoked, that you know you're missing entries. And on your report, you'll say, oh, this tried to book to this error. And it will tell you what DMAAI is trying to use it. So now it will help you debug where the problem actually is. So As a general rule, no. There are certain circumstances where it makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ed. That actually appears to be the end of our questions for today. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, and Ed for your great presentation as well. And as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit, and you will be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. And after today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone that attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. And if you, oh, sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before you closed, my email is up on the screen now. And if anybody has any questions that weren't addressed, because there's a lot of comments here again about the quick poll, please just reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ed, and thank you everybody for attending our presentation, and we hope that you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.